For decades, the geniuses in Washington told you America had to be the world's cop. Very smart people, right? We were supposed to patrol every street on earth, break up every fight, and pay every bill. We sent our troops to deserts, mountains, jungles. We knocked down regimes, did nation building, wrote constitutions for people who never even asked. And while we were doing all that, our own borders were open, our cities were crumbling, our factories were closing. That is not strength. That is what you call a very dumb business model. You don't run the world like that. You don't run a lemonade stand like that. After the Cold War, the United States was on top, no question. We had incredible power. But the foreign policy class looked at that moment and said, wonderful, we can do anything, anywhere, forever. So they tried. They went into Iraq because they said it would be quick. They went into Afghanistan. They stayed for 20 years. They called it a revolution in military affairs. In reality, it was a revolution in wasting American lives and American money. Trillions of dollars, thousands and thousands of brave soldiers killed and wounded, families destroyed. For what? To rebuild countries that turned around and burned our flags. Meanwhile, back home, Americans were tired. You were tired of coming home from work, turning on the TV and hearing the same people say, we need another intervention, another strike, another regime change. You knew it wasn't working. You could feel it. That is the moment I walked into. The so-called experts said the old way had to continue. The American people said, no, we're done, enough. And I said exactly what you were thinking. No more stupid wars, America first. Now the media screamed, oh, he's an isolationist. Total lie. I was never for making America weaker. I was for making America smarter, stronger, where it counts. Selective, not suicidal. There is a big difference between being weak and being wise. Weakness is when you can't fight. Wisdom is when you don't waste your strength on fights that don't matter. And for too long, America fought in places that did not matter for the American worker, the American family, the American future. The truth is, the United States was overextended. We had troops in over 100 countries, bases everywhere, commitments to everybody. If there was a problem anywhere on the planet, Washington said, send the Americans, they'll handle it, they'll pay for it. It's like being the richest guy in the neighborhood and everybody expects you to mow their lawn, fix their roof, and pay their mortgage. At some point you say, you know what, folks, no. I'll take care of my own house first. That is what I did with NATO. For years, presidents went over there, gave nice speeches, smiled, got the photo ops, and then they came home while American taxpayers kept paying the bill. I went there and said, you're going to pay your fair share, not 10 years from now. Now, they said it was rude, they said it was undiplomatic, but suddenly billions and billions of dollars started flowing into NATO from European countries that had been freeloading for decades. They had the money all along. They just needed someone to tell them the game was over. That is not abandoning allies, that is saving an alliance. Because an alliance that rests entirely on the back of the American middle class is not sustainable. It's a scam. We ended the scam. The same logic applies everywhere. You cannot be the world's cop and the world's piggy bank at the same time. You cannot defend everybody's borders and ignore your own. You cannot rebuild foreign cities and ignore Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago. So the pivot was simple, but very powerful. America would still be a superpower, but we would be a selective superpower. We would use our strength where it truly protects American lives, American prosperity, American security. Think about it this way. If you have the greatest boxer in the world, You don't throw him into every bar fight at 2 in the morning. You protect him, you train him, you pick the right fights, the ones that matter. You make sure when he goes into the ring, it's for a real title, not for somebody else's ego. That is how a serious country behaves. You protect your forces, you maintain your edge, you avoid wasting your best people and your best equipment on endless sideshows. People say, but America used to show power by invading. That was the old way of thinking. In the 21st century, power is not only measured in tanks and ships, power is also technology, energy, finance, alliances, who leads in advanced semiconductors, who controls the major payment systems, who dominates the skies with stealth aircraft, who has the most trusted currency, who attracts the best scientists and entrepreneurs. On all those fronts, the United States still has enormous advantages, and under my approach, the goal is to protect those advantages, not throw them away in some dusty desert just to make a think tank happy. When you pull back from dumb wars, you don't become weaker, you become more focused. You can rebuild your military, you can modernize equipment instead of grinding it down year after year. You can take care of veterans instead of creating new ones. You can also put pressure in smarter ways. Sanctions, energy, policy, trade, cyber. You don't always need a Marine division to send a very clear message. Sometimes you just need the right financial move or the right diplomatic squeeze. The foreign policy establishment hates this. They built their careers on the idea that America must be everywhere all the time. If we're not bombing somebody this week, they think we're retreating. They dream of a world where America is always on call, always paying, always bleeding. But American families don't live in that fantasy world. You live in the real world where your son or daughter might be the one deployed, where your tax dollars fund every brilliant operation that falls apart 5 years later. You know the cost. You've seen the funerals. So the strategic pivot is about respecting that cost. It is about saying our strength is precious. We're not going to waste it for politicians who want to look tough on television. We will be tough when it matters. We will be generous when it makes sense. But we will not be stupid. That is why this shift scares our rivals so much. Because when America stops doing free security for everyone, other countries have to take more responsibility. They have to spend more. They have to think harder about picking fights. And they start to realize the United States is not walking away. The United States is choosing its moment. Critics look at this and scream, decline. They say America isn't invading enough countries. It must be weak. In reality, it's the opposite. A superpower that knows how to say no is much more dangerous than a superpower that says yes to everything. Saying yes to everything is how you get overextended. Saying yes to everything is how empires collapse. Saying yes to everything is how you end up broke at home and hated abroad. The pivot from world's cop to selective superpower is not about apologizing for American power. It's about protecting American power, keeping it sharp, keeping it ready, using it where it truly matters. And here is where the story gets really interesting. Because the people who hate this pivot, the same people who love the old endless war model, point to certain crises and say, look, America backed off, Trump backed off. That proves the country is finished. They talk about Venezuela, they talk about Yemen, they talk about Syria. They say the United States didn't go all the way in. That must mean America is a paper tiger. But is that really what happened? Did America suddenly become weak? Or did America finally start acting like a serious power that refuses to walk into every trap laid by every small regime on the planet? The answer to that question changes the whole picture, and it's exactly what comes next. Because when you look closely at Venezuela, at Yemen, at Syria, you see something very different from the story the critics tell. You see how walking away from the wrong fight can sometimes be the strongest move of all. Let's talk about Venezuela, because the fake experts love this story. They say, look at Trump. He sent ships, he talked tough, and then he didn't invade. America is finished. These are the same people, by the way, who gave you Iraq and Afghanistan. They think if you don't start a new war every 5 minutes, you must be weak, very sick mindset. Here's what actually happened. We put a powerful American naval force off the coast of Venezuela. Big statement, big signal. Everybody in Caracas, in Havana, in Moscow, in Beijing, they all noticed. Now, the old Washington way says this: you move the ships, now you must invade, or else you lose face. That's how they think. They don't care how many Americans die as long as their theory looks good in a think tank report. My way is different. You move the ships, you show the flag, you create pressure, then you ask one simple question: does going further actually help the United States? Not the TV pundits, not the arms dealers, the United States. And the honest answer was no. Venezuela was not 2003. Iraq all over again, it would have been worse. Urban warfare, jungle, militias, foreign advisors, years and years of occupation, trillions of dollars, thousands of lives. So I did something the geniuses in Washington almost never do. I listened to reality. I listened to the American people who were tired of body bags and broken promises. I looked at the cost and I said, we are not going to turn this into another endless war. That is not fear. That is discipline. That is strength with a brain attached. You don't prove you're strong by walking into every trap. You prove you're strong by refusing to be played. And a lot of these regimes try to play America. They want us stuck, bogged down, bleeding. So no, we didn't storm Caracas. We didn't topple the government and then spend 20 years trying to rebuild the country while our own cities fall apart. We showed force. We squeezed with sanctions. We built pressure with allies. And we kept American soldiers out of another quagmire. The critics call that backing down. But from the perspective of a mother in Texas, Ohio, Michigan, whose kid might have been sent there, it wasn't backing down, it was keeping a promise. No more stupid wars. Now look at Yemen and the Red Sea. The Houthis, a group most Americans had never heard of, suddenly firing drones and missiles at ships, making a big mess. The old formula would say, full-scale invasion, boots on the ground, massive occupation, let's go. It's always the same answer with these people. We used a different approach. Targeted strikes, working with partners, defending, shipping, but we did not turn Yemen into another U.S. occupation zone. Because here's the truth, you can destroy a lot of things with the U.S. military. We have incredible power, but you can't use it like a sledgehammer on every problem and expect miracles, and some problems get worse the more you smash them. So you use what I call smart deterrence. You punish, you protect your own interests, you make it clear there is a line, but you don't sign up for another 20-year adventure in a place where everybody else wants you to pay the bill. It's the same in Syria. The experts said, we must remove Assad. We must rebuild the whole country. We must stay forever. They love that word, must. There's always a must when they want your money and your kids. We went in with a different priority: destroy ISIS, crush the caliphate, protect American forces, support partners on the ground, and then get out of the forever war mindset. Remember when I said it was time to bring some of our troops home from Syria? The establishment screamed. They said, he's abandoning the region, he's surrendering. No, we weren't surrendering. We were ending a mission creep that had no finish line. You know who loved that forever war model? Contractors, lobbyists, certain generals who retire and go on TV, they loved it, but the American people did not. So when critics point at Syria or Yemen or Venezuela and say, see, America didn't go all the way in, this proves decline, they are telling you something about themselves, not about the United States. They are telling you they cannot imagine American power without American blood on the sand. We draw a different line. There is a huge difference between can't fight and don't need to fight. When I ran businesses, I didn't bid on every deal. Sometimes a deal looks flashy, but it's a trap. The costs are huge, the upside is tiny, the partners are bad. A good businessman walks away. A bad businessman jumps in just to feel important and then goes bankrupt. That's what happened to America under the old model. We jumped into deals that made no sense. We put our best people in impossible situations. We let other countries free ride on our courage and our money. In Venezuela, in Yemen, in Syria, the message was different. We're not going to destroy our own strength, chasing every problem on the map. We're going to protect Americans first. We're going to pick fights that matter. Does that mean our adversaries stop testing us? Of course not. They test us all the time. They fire rockets, they send drones, they post propaganda videos. They want to make us overreact. They want us to give them exactly what they dream of, a giant American footprint they can attack over and over. We said no. We hit back when necessary. We defended our people, but we refused to give them the endless, open-ended war they were hoping for. Some say, but doesn't that let them claim victory? Let them talk. They can film all the victory parades they want. At the end of the day, victory for America is not about how many speeches some militia leader gives. Victory for America is about how many Americans come home alive, how strong our economy remains, how ready our forces are for the real challenges. And that's the key point, the real challenges. Because while the pundits obsess over whether we invaded this or that small country, the bigger game is happening somewhere else. Technology, great power, competition, cyber, space, energy. Walking away from certain fights doesn't mean we gave up. It means we started to prioritize. We stopped burning our strength on side quests so we could rebuild it for the main event. When we don't invade Venezuela, we save resources. When we don't occupy Yemen, we save resources. When we don't turn Syria into Iraq too, we save resources. Resources we can put into hypersonic weapons, missile defense, cyber, our Navy, our Air Force, our nuclear deterrent. Resources we can put into America's industrial base, our energy independence, our border security. The critics call that retreat. But a smart general doesn't attack every hill. He pulls back from the ones that don't matter so he can dominate the ones that do. So yes, we walked away from certain battles. We did it on purpose. We did it with our eyes open. We did it because America's strength is too valuable to waste. And here's what really keeps our adversaries up at night. For many years, they thought they understood the pattern. Provoke America, and America will rush in big, messy, emotional, with no exit plan. Now, they're not so sure. They see a United States that can show force without automatically jumping into occupation. They see a United States that can punish, sanction, isolate, and then hold back the big hammer for when it truly matters. They see a United States that might be less predictable, less easily manipulated. That makes them nervous, because the old predictable. America could be baited. The new America, the selective superpower, is harder to read and harder to trap. The truth is, when we walked away from some of these fights, we weren't signaling that America was done. We were signaling that America was changing, upgrading, moving from a clumsy empire model to a sharper, more focused great power. And that leads us directly to the next question. If we're not spending all our strength on these regional sinkholes, what are we doing with it? Where is that power going? How is America preparing for the next era, the era of big players, big technology, big competition? Because while the establishment cries about decline, something else is happening. Quietly, sometimes clumsily, but definitely, the United States is reshaping its military, its economy, its alliances for a new kind of world. And that bigger, longer game, that hidden game plan for the next great power era is where the real story of American power is being written. For years, the talking heads have been screaming one word: decline. They sit on TV panels, they write very boring books, and they all say the same thing. America is over, the empire is finished, it's all downhill from here. They say this while cashing checks in American dollars. By the way, very interesting. Here is the truth they never tell you. While they are crying about decline, the United States has been quietly doing something else, rebuilding, repositioning, getting ready for a different kind of world, not the world of 1,995, not the world where one superpower polices everything, a world of big players, big technology, big competition, a world where raw power still matters, but smart power matters even more. You see it in our military planning. When I came in, a lot of our equipment was tired and overused. Fighting in sand and mountains for 20 years, our forces were exhausted. So we started investing in what actually matters for the next era: long-range missiles, hypersonic research, missile defense, cyber capabilities, space assets. The old model said, send in the troops, send in the tanks. We'll figure out the rest later. The new model says, hit from distance, fight smarter, use information, precision, technology. Our rivals built these big anti-access area denial systems, missiles, radars, layered defenses. They thought, now the Americans can't come close. We've locked them out. So what did we do? We started working on ways to strike from farther away, to confuse their sensors, to jam their systems, to hit targets without putting thousands of Americans right under their guns. The same thing is happening in cyber and space. You don't see it on TV every night, but that's where a lot of the real game is played now. Satellites, networks, data. A country can have a lot of tanks. If its communications go dark, those tanks are just very heavy lawn ornaments, and nobody does high-end technology like the United States and the American private sector. Nobody. Then you look at energy. Under my administration, we moved toward energy dominance, not just energy independence dominance, because energy is power. If you can produce, export, and price energy, you shape whole regions. You're not begging from OPEC. You're not begging from anybody. You are the one other countries come to when they need to keep the lights on. And by the way, that is also a weapon our rivals understand. They use gas, oil, pipelines as leverage. The difference is, when America leads in energy, we don't have to bully small countries. We just give them a better offer than the bad guys. Supply chains are the same story. For years, the geniuses said, ship everything to China, don't worry, it's efficient. They love that word, efficient. Efficient until a pandemic hits. Efficient until a rival decides to choke off a critical component. efficient until you realize you can't build a plane, a tank, or even a car without parts that come from someone who doesn't like you very much. So we started bringing manufacturing back, bringing jobs back, reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, whatever you want to call it. The point is simple. If you want to be a great power in the 21st century, you cannot rely on your enemies to build your weapons and your medicines. You just can't. All of this is part of the hidden game plan. Not hidden because it's a secret conspiracy, hidden because the media doesn't understand it or doesn't want to talk about it. They would rather obsess over one ship, one tweet, one headline. They miss the big picture. The big picture is that American power is being redesigned for a long competition with serious rivals, not to babysit failed states forever. And don't forget the financial and technological side. People say the dollar is finished. They've been saying that for 50 years. If America is so weak, why do countries still hoard dollars? Why do they fear American sanctions? Why do they fight to access American markets, American banks, American technology? Because deep down, they know something. The United States still sits at the center of the global system. Our currency, our stock markets, our tech companies, our intellectual property. When we choose to use those tools carefully, not crazily, it changes behavior. Sanctions can hit harder than bombs. Export controls can freeze a rival's entire industry. Financial pressure can isolate regimes more effectively than another division of tanks. That doesn't mean we should abuse those tools. We shouldn't sanction everyone under the sun. We shouldn't weaponize everything all the time. But when used smartly, these are strengths only America and a few close allies really have. And that brings us to alliances. The critics love to say no one trusts America anymore. Really? Because when there's a crisis, who do they call? Russia? China? Iran? Or the United States and NATO? When smaller countries feel threatened, they don't line up for protection from dictators. They line up for training, equipment, partnerships with the U.S. military. They send their officers to our schools. They want our jets, our systems, our intelligence. That is soft power plus hard power. That is what a real network of alliances looks like. Not a bunch of forced vassals, but partners that keep choosing you even when they complain, even when they argue, because they know the alternative is much worse. So when you put this all together, what do you see? You see a United States that is modernizing its forces, upgrading its technology, rebuilding its industrial and energy base, rewiring supply chains, leveraging financial power, and still leading the most powerful alliance system the world has ever seen. Does that sound like a country that is finished, or does it sound like a country that is learning from its mistakes and preparing for the next round? Now, is everything perfect? Of course not. We still have big problems: border chaos, debt, culture wars, bad leadership in many places. But decline is a choice. It's not fate. And a lot of what the so-called decline narrative describes is not inevitable fall. It's mismanagement, bad policy, globalist fantasies that can be reversed when you have leaders who remember who they work for. That is why this whole pivot matters so much. Moving from world's cop to selective superpower, walking away from dumb wars, rebuilding real power at home. It's not about shrinking America, it's about hardening America, making the country more resilient, more independent, more dangerous to real enemies, and less available for every little adventure dreamed up in some think tank. Our rivals understand this far better than the pundits. When they look at the United States, they don't see a paper tiger. They see a country that still out-innovates, out-invests, and out-allies almost everyone. And they know that if America ever truly focuses, if we line up our economy, our technology, our military, and our people behind a clear set of priorities, it will be very, very hard to beat. That is the fear behind all their propaganda. They don't fear a tired America stuck in 20 different wars. They fear a disciplined America, a selective America, an America that says, we will not waste our strength on you, but if you cross this line, you will regret it for 100 years. So when you hear them say, the era of American hegemony is over, remember something. The era of America pretending it can do everything, everywhere, for everyone, that era should be over. It needed to end. It was killing us. But the era of American power, that's a different story. That story is still being written. In new factories that open on American soil, in new shipyards and labs, in new technologies that our rivals will try to copy and fail. And the most important part of that story is not written in Washington. It is written by the American people, by whether you demand leaders who put your security, your prosperity, your sons and daughters ahead of ego projects overseas. If America chooses that path, the path of strength with restraint, power with purpose, then the next great power era will not be the story of our collapse. It will be the story of our comeback, bigger, smarter, tougher, not a fading empire apologizing for its existence, a confident nation still leading, but on its own terms, a nation that learned from the disasters of the past, pivoted, and refused to surrender its future to anyone. That is the hidden game plan. That is the choice in front of us. And if we make the right one, people will look back on this moment and say, they all said America was finished. They were wrong. It was only the beginning of the next chapter.